A very warm welcome to another edition of the Roundtable. Now, you know that over the years or last couple of decades, income inequality has widened or plateaued at a high level in several countries, often with large regional discrepancies. The situation is not that different in Ghana, as broad economic growth and political stability have enabled Ghana to vastly improve living standards across the country in recent years. But reducing poverty and inequality remains one of its principal challenges. Nevertheless, while economic growth has certainly had an impact on reducing the instances of poverty in the country, certain geographic and socioeconomic segments remain relatively isolated from the benefits of economic growth. On this platform, we will try to analyze the forms, structure, drivers, challenges and implications of inequalities in Ghana, examine its political economy and suggest remedial policy options. My guests are seated, and with me is Mr. Mohammed-Anwar Sadat Adam. Mr. Anwar Sadat Adam is the head of programs and campaigns at OXFAM Ghana. With him is Nana Kwasi Gyan Apenteng. Nana Kwasi Gyan Apenteng is the chairman of the National Media Commission, the NMC. And Mr. Charles Dzradosi is the Social Policy Analyst of UNICEF. Welcome, gentlemen. Inequality is a big thing in Ghana. What exactly is inequality and how does it impact on our economic growth?
Thank you very much. There are scientific ways of analyzing or assessing inequalities. One of them is done through looking at the incomes of citizens. Surveys are conducted, research can be conducted, but it's basically looking at the incomes per the individuals. So looking at that income level, there's what we call the Gini coefficient. It's a measurement of that tells the gap between those who have and those who don't have. And essentially it brings, tells you the level or the gap between the poorest and the richest. So in Ghana, for instance, what we call the Gini coefficient has grown by 33 percentage points from 1992 to 2013. There are some poverty and studies that are coming up, but this is what we have now. And it clearly shows that even if it is 1%, it's a big gap. So 3.3% growth is clearly not acceptable. And this, even though poverty levels have reduced overall, the gap, the bottom 60 of Ghanaians had a 35% share of the national total national income. Now it has declined to 29%, which means that the gap is increasing, and which has serious implications for how we grow as a nation and how we make everybody count for the future of this nation. And also that the poorest 10% of the people in Ghana only have will be $1 a month better off if that inequality has been breached.
It's not breached?
Yes.
Mm. Yeah. That is serious. But if the gap has widened, then what really are the causes of these inequality gaps? Let me give that to Mr. Sadat.
Okay. Thank you very much. I guess maybe building on from where my colleague Charles has ended, the causes of inequality are varied and are mixed. Essentially, one of the key drivers of inequality, if you trace it back in your introduction, you talked about the political economy and the structure of our economy. You will find that a lot of the issues that have to do with inequality traces back to the way we design our policies and the way the policies get implemented. So, for example, in the last 2 decades, where Ghana's effort with support from development partners focused largely on poverty eradication, we didn't look much into the idea of inequality. So significant issues regarding policy design, who gets into the policy space, what kind of policies do we put in place for both economic and social development, are part of the causes of inequality. If our policies are made in such a manner that those who already have get more, it means that those who are poorer will get poorer. And if you take this along even the way economic issues are discussed in this country, if you look at the fiscal policy, which talks about how we raise revenue and how those revenues are spent, will tell you the reasons why inequality is growing. Spending in the social sector, and by social sector I mean spending in education and health, has not actually kept pace with the level of economic growth that we have in this country, to the extent that our budget spending on areas such as health have been declining in the last 10 years, from about 10% to about 7% in 2017. But the government have made a commitment through what we call the Abuja Declaration to spend at least 15% of our resources into the provision of health. If you take it back into investment that we make in this country, for example, in infrastructure, you will notice that a lot of the development that are taking place in well-to-do areas. And so the rural people who are looking for access to school, access to healthcare, access to water and sanitation are not getting those services. And to that extent, it's also contributing to the inequality gap that we're talking about. A rural poor child is less or is unlikely to graduate through to the senior secondary school compared to an urban child who comes from a wealthy family. And these are some of the key issues that we talk about. If you take it further in terms of the geography, we all know the development divide between the north of Ghana and the south of Ghana. But this also goes back to the issue of policy and decisions that we make as a country. And that is also contributing to this kind of inequality. If you take it also to social groups, for example, we talk about gender. We all know where we place women in this country. And you look at some of our cultural, some of our social values contributing to putting women in the less and less influential positions, are also contributing to widening inequality, especially between men and women. As we speak, for example, if you look at our parliament, for example, only 11% are made up of women. If you go to the lower level of our governance in terms of district assemblies, the situation is even worse. Of the over 200 and something districts that we have less than 20 women who are municipal or district chief executives. And if you talk about our own structure and the way the economy is organized, women are found in that informal economy, which is very vulnerable in terms of its exposure to external shocks. Whenever there is any crisis in terms of increase in fuel prices, or there's an external shock in terms of how the government is able to raise resources to implement development projects and programs that they have, it links back to affecting those vulnerable sections of our population who are found in the informal sector. So for example, if you look at employment in this country, a lot of women are found in the informal sector. In our market, selling food, in the rural economy, producing food to feed us. And so their employment is not something that is sustainable. And this also contributes to the widening inequality between men and women, if you look at it from this perspective.
Okay, Nana, let me take your initial comments on all that has been said. He's raised very key causes of the increased inequality as being experienced in the country, and why the income inequalities also persist, as Mr. Dzradosi said. But when I take your initial comment, then I will touch briefly on how these inequalities or the growing inequality threaten our ability to obtain the sustainable poverty reduction.
Thank you very much. I think my colleagues who come from this very important sector of analyzing these issues have really laid out the arguments. But you see, at the heart of inequality or inequalities is one word, and that is unfair. So lack of fairness is the critical issue when it comes to the governance and policy issues regarding inequalities. Inequalities imply that some people have more than others, and that increasingly what they have gives them an advantage, and that for those who don't have, what they do not have gives them a disadvantage. So there are many types of inequalities as they have laid out. You have economic, social, income, gender, education, opportunities, etc. But let's start with a very important one, which is historic inequalities. This is where we can start from. Let us say at independence, what was the situation like? So colonial policy almost had inequality embedded in it, and one half of the country was developed, the other was not, and reserved for a pool of labor to come and work in our mines, talking about the north. Other parts, people traveled to come and work on cocoa, and the incomes were not, fairly distributed, etc., etc. So you start from historic inequality and build up. So what has happened is that those who had the advantages have continued to use those advantages to build further, and those who have not have also suffered as a consequence. And this is what we call the widening gap. And this is what has created the gap. So it is not just that we have inequalities, but the inequalities are widening. And we got the statistics from UNICEF, where we know that over the last 2 decades, whereas we've had quite good economic growth and even some useful development indices, the gap between the lowest 10% and the richest 10% has grown astronomically. And that is even just working by the data. If you travel around this country, you don't need, you need it, but I mean the evidence of our own eyes. I traveled around half of Ghana in 2012, courtesy Star Ghana. And I went through central, western, Brong and Hafo, upper west regions, and half of northern region. And the poverty in this country is excruciating. And it's not just that we are poor. At independence, we were poor, but there was not that big.
Parity.
Today, these figures that we are quoting is working on the law of averages. And so, for example, if you have 1 millionaire and 1 poor person, you can say that between the two of them, everybody has got 500,000, but which, of course, is not true. One has got all of it and one has nothing. And so, beyond the statistics, we know that in this country, the gap is very wide. And we are talking of these inequalities in the economic sphere, in the social sphere of incomes, gender, education, and above all, opportunities. So one of them, which comes graphically to mind, that we must all work with, is this. We've all got 24 hours in a day. Nobody has more. And we all have to work in this same future we are entering into. So take a child from not far away. I used to, well, I have to say, there's a school somewhere quite close to Accra. And one day I was traveling when I stopped by, no library, no textbooks. So some of us decided to go and give them books occasionally. And a child from that school is not in the Upper West region. We are talking about Greater Accra. And a child at Ghana International School, they all have 24 hours going into the future. And if you look at where they are going and the obvious trajectory of their lives, that tells you that this issue is the biggest threat to our stability. It is the biggest threat. We talk, about unemployment, this, that, but they all pull into this major issue of inequality in our country.
But how is it impacting negatively on the SDGs, especially when it comes to poverty reduction?
Well, obviously, you see, you can talk about general poverty reduction, and the statistics. We have all become statisticians overnight preparing for this, and I've looked at UNICEF statistics. So we know that there's been considerable poverty reduction in the country, but that is the danger. As he said, for example, we can talk about health. and the Abuja declaration and the subsequent promise of the government to spend up to 15% on health must ask the question, to whom will this 15% go? Where will it go? So you can say that the headline item is 15% to be spent on health. The unstated subtext is, where is this money going? So we can talk about poverty reduction, and to be fair, we have gone a long way. Listen, when I was a child, only about maybe 2-3% of Ghanaians ever wore footwear. And that's not like 200 years ago. So we haven't, but you know, now everybody wears at least Chalewati. We've come very far. But in saying we've come very far, some have moved from barefoot to V8 and others have only moved from barefoot to Chalewati. So we are talking that we can talk very easily about reducing poverty and all the goals that have been set. But embedded in there somewhere are the figures that must be interrogated, are the facts that must be brought to the table, are the policies that must be hammered out before we can say that this thing has had an impact. Otherwise, as I'm saying, you're using law of averages, so you have many people who have all moved out of poverty. But the hidden fact, and let me say this before you take me away, that one of the areas where you see inequality most is in the media. Over 80% of our airtime, of our media space and everything is devoted to the elite, to promoting the interests of those who have, and even being used against those who don't have. And in many, many insidious ways, one of them being advertising. We target the poor with all kinds of products because they are the ones who buy those products. You know, we just anybody makes this and comes and it is bitters or it is this and that. And all day long, we go on this. Do you think the people from Trasako Valley or wherever you call it, they buy that stuff? They don't. So even in the media space, the voices of the poor are not heard. And increasingly, we increase the volume of media. 400 radio stations. How many of them actually do even bring out poor people to interview? It's all on the elite and all on the small rich band. They monopolize that, they monopolize health, they monopolize education and everything else. So it is not just a question of how it's impacting, but in what ways. We have to really go deep. And I'm happy you've started this program, and I hope that it will continue.
Right, thank you. But how do we go about reducing it? You touch on the media particularly, and you are for us. So let me take your thoughts on how the media can go about reducing such inequalities when it comes to advert promotion, churning out of the news, putting out information and all of those. Then I'll come to UNICEF and OXFAM as to the public.
See, generally speaking, you can only do this very deliberately. You have to set out to want to change. We have to be the change we want to be. These things don't happen naturally. You see, there's a fallacy, which is the trickle down. That if we, develop, then we can be that kind of thing. It doesn't happen like that. You can develop, you can make budgets upon budgets unless you target poverty deliberately as a policy and say, we cannot accept that in our country in the 21st century, some people don't have drinking water. So above all else, in the next 5 years, we are going to make sure that everybody has drinking water. It has to be deliberate, it has to be targeted, it has to be budgeted for, it has to be paid for by all of us. But in as much as we are thinking, well, for political reasons, I have to give this to these people and to that, and the rich must be, because they are the most vocal. Let's face it, when we go on social media, where we make a lot of noise these days, in my village, I can tell you one thing. Even finding the network is a problem. And there's no 4G, so how are you going to...
Where is your village?
I won't tell you.
Perhaps, who knows? A telecom industry may be watching and they will want to,
break it. Don't do that.
Okay, Nana. Nana, go ahead.
The point is that we sit here in Accra, and we are crying when the network is not good. For some people, there's none to start with. So I'm saying that for us in the media, let it be a policy. For example, GBC here, the management will have to say, how do we address this inequality? We've done it in the past. For example, programs like Women's Hour and all that were designed to bring some change and give some more voices. But then we seem to have a word you used at the beginning, plateaued. We shouldn't plateau. We should go on and find new ways of bringing the issues of the poor to the fore. It should be a deliberate policy. Either, you say that more vox pop, in rural areas, just to hear what they are saying about this budget. What are they saying about education and all that? It can be done. But that, I'm saying the principle is that you have to deliberately want to do it and then set out how to do it.
Mr. You wanted to add something quickly.
Yes. In fact, Nana has really cut across a lot of the things, underlying issues and also the manifestations. And like Mr. Anwar also said, you see, if we think that we're doing business as usual, that we say, oh, national health insurance is there for everybody, but then people who are supposed to benefit are not accessing the health service itself. If the clinic, the health facility is not there, you can have a health insurance card, but then the service is not there, the doctors are not there, the nurses are not there. So this is where we need to rethink some of the investments that we are making. If we are going to impact a majority of the poor, you need to provide services that reach them. In the health, for instance, you are talking about CHIPS compounds. In education, we are talking about the primary level, basic education. If everybody has education, currently about 1.3 million kids are out of school.
1.3 million.
They are not in school at all to even think of even having poor learning and what have you. So this is why we are saying that it is not so much about coming up with programs. They are good, but let it be targeted, let it reach the unreached, so that, for instance, last time I was talking about doctors. About 54% of all the doctors are in Accra. The remainder are in the regional capitals and then a few rural areas. So
probably because there are no facilities in there.
So our investments in health should think about bridging that gap. We should not just give up our arms, say, oh, we cannot do it, or it is too. Let us deliberately now begin to provide those services, incentives, and make sure that when people are going anywhere, it happens also in education. Teachers are refusing postings to rural areas because they say their facilities are not there. But that is why everything that we do must be comprehensive and must be engaged at targeting the most. The people are choked in Accra. Teachers have choked Accra in capitals. There must be some deliberate effort to spread them across the country. And if it will mean putting up bungalows for them, putting up water systems to provide for them, we should aim at doing that. And that is why it is important. Apart from that, we're talking about where are investments going. Right now, agriculture is one of the areas that should really benefit a majority of the poor and the poorest. But here's the case, investment in agri is also going down, significantly going down in terms of the budget allocation. So if agriculture is going down, then it means that services targeted at the poor are also going down, because a majority of the poor are also into primary production and processing. And Anwar also talk about the women. So if we are not reaching these people, segment of the population, then we are really not helping ourselves, and the gap is going to increase, and we are not going to experience the kind of growth we all want. If the poor grow, we all grow together. And so if we leave them behind, then we're all going to suffer the consequences.
Right. Have your bite on this one. Then I'll Nana, you know, Mr. Dzradosi spoke about education.
Yeah.
There has been the talk that, you know, there's no short ticket out of poverty reduction, but for a solid education. So when he touched on education, it just struck me like that. I'll come back to you to find out whether you share in that opinion. And Mr. Dzradosi, I'll also come back to you on social policies because you're a social policy analyst. But let me have your bite on the reducing of the inequalities. Yes.
I guess both Nana and then Charles have said a lot. But to add, just building on what they both of them have said, is that inequality in actual fact is not by accident. Follow from what Nana said, it's historic, it has its own implications, the choices that we make as a country. How does it undermine the economic growth? If you have less and less people educated, it means that you have less human capital. And that means that the Sustainable Development Goals that talks about education, you're not going to achieve that. If you are investing less in the health sector, it means that your healthy population will reduce. So the man hours or the productivity of your population will also reduce to that extent. So that is also going to undermine economic growth and our achievement of the SDGs. But related to that was a point Nana made earlier on in relation to how decisions are made and resources are allocated. How is our tax system, our tax administration? The one person, $1 million Nana made reference to is not paying enough tax revenue to the state. Corporate institutions are not actually paying what they are supposed to pay so that the nation can have a lot more resources to be able to invest in these areas. These are some of the things that are going to affect our economic growth, because if we are paying the right taxes and have more progressive taxation system and administration, it means that we're going to get a lot more resources domestically to be able to spend in these key social sectors that we've mentioned earlier on. Related to that point is also the fact that there is going to be, already it is there, the widening of less opportunities for underprivileged or the poorer sections of our society. In education, Nana made reference to that, Charles made reference to health. If I do not have access to these opportunities, which are more kind of to help me to leverage or to leapfrog into the top percentages that we're talking about, it means that at the end of the day, we are not actually addressing or achieving the sustainable development goals. So poverty is there, poverty will continue to widen. Issues of hunger, Charles made reference to less and less investment in agriculture, which means that agriculture productivity is declining, and we've all seen that over the last 10 years, from being the highest contributor to our GDP to now struggling to even maintain a certain level of growth. Tells you that. And we have a lot of the poorer segments of our society in the agriculture or the rural economy. And if you are not investing much in that, we are also contributing to less economic growth in the rural economy, which actually employs close to 46% of the labor force of this country. So the issues are actually intertwined. And they are not mutually exclusive. And when you talk about inequality, you actually need to find a way of addressing them in a more holistic manner, in a more comprehensive manner that you can deal with it. Another one I want to just bring in before my other panelists come in is the issue of our public financial management system, how the taxes are collected and spent. We are gradually moving towards another debt crisis, to the extent that we are close to 70% of our GDP going to service debt. As at last year, when the budget was presented and the spending that came out, paying just debt service alone left with the government about 42%. To pay for salaries and wages, item 1, which takes a chunk of the resources, close to 60–70%, and the remaining 30% is left for development expenditure. So these are some of the things that are related. So the government does not have enough money to invest in education, in health, in rural infrastructure, in agriculture, all undermining our ability to promote economic growth and address issues of inequality. But I must stress that economic growth does not necessarily translate to addressing inequality unless you make deliberate attempt in terms of policy and programs that you design to deal with all the issues that we raise, both the historic, the gender, the social, and the economic dimensions of it. So we should not focus only on economic growth. Economic growth is good, but it is not enough to address inequality in this country.
That's right. Nana, let's come to the issue of education. Is it the surest ticket?
Yes, but it has to be explained. But first of all, something that has been asserted here, which is critical to understand, that all these issues are intertwined. And so sometimes what governments have done here and elsewhere, which has not worked, is to try and segment them too rigidly. That, oh, education is the key, so let's focus on. But you have to plan it in such a way that it's a system thing that, you know, it's got to impact everywhere. But back to the question of education, I can tell you what my eyes have seen. That in this country, when in the First Republic, we were young, and there was the spread of education was so rapid and so vast across the country. I think Ghana went from something like 20 secondary schools to about 80 within 4 or 5 years. And everywhere we had the Ghana Education Trust schools, and the result became very obvious a few years later. And so you had very good literacy, and that translated into people finding jobs and finding more comfortable lives and opportunities and all the rest of them. But again, even that in itself, you can build schools, but what goes into them is simply not just to put a school somewhere and make the headline that we have built a school here, but also the inequalities, even in the school system, remain. And today, we know that we have some schools that everybody wants. They are part of the historic inequalities that we have sustained. And we are not saying good schools should become bad schools, but we are saying that all schools must become good.
Great.
And instead of making sure that those that are already good are forever becoming better and better, make sure that others also do have a crack at becoming good enough to produce equally good people. So that is critical, that education itself is not just available, but good education is available to all. Let me touch on something. You see, when you think about it, we all know that our food comes from agriculture,
right,
but we've left that to the poor. There's really, it's become a lottery of life that if we are lucky, but we have designed a system that is ensuring that everybody who can get out of agriculture has done so and will continue to do so. In my village, which I won't mention, I heard a woman arguing with her son, saying, you won't go to Accra. All the people are going to Accra. What are you doing here? So we push everybody out, and the most vulnerable, the weakest, those who have nothing, the most demoralized are farming. How on earth do you think this is not mortgaging the future? That the weakest, those who everybody wants to come, but they can't for one reason or another. So those who have actually chosen to farm are very few. The others are in there because they have to. So we have to have a program that ensures that those places are serviced. Many such places are unserved. They are just there, and it's like it's as usual. And they've not been targeted. There's nothing to ensure that somebody will get up one day and say, I'm here in Accra, but I think I'll do better for myself, my family, and my country if I were to go into agriculture. No, it won't happen just for the majority, because there's nothing to go to. And this is so serious. We'll get to a point where we will import plantain and maize. It's going to happen. But as he said, if we were to think about what the productive sectors were, and the people working in them. Let me say my final thing here on this, that we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of government? If we crack that one, inequalities will become clearer. Who should be at the center of government? Is it to provide jobs for political party people? Is it just to ensure growth? Is it for development? None of these would matter as much as the human being. If we place the human being, each individual, as a human being at the center of government, it is the only reason, you know, that the human being must be looked after. If we were to do that, then we'll say, where are these human beings? How are we looking after them? What are we doing for these people? Then we begin to find out where, I mean, look at the inequality between the geography of lottery, the lottery of geography. If you are born in the Upper West region of Ghana, you are worse off at birth than the one born in, say, the Eastern region. At birth, you haven't committed any crime. But just because you were born there, rather than some other place, the inequality is massive and is loaded against you for life. Why?
Merci. Mr. Dzradosi,
Yes.
the issues are really deep and needs to be tackled as quickly as practicable. Nana has touched on very sensitive areas, and Mr. Anwar also made the point that, you know, economic growth is not the panacea to bridging the inequality gap, but policies also have to be taken a real look at. So I come to you as a social policy analyst on the extent of social policy protections over the years. How has it impacted significantly on incomes, equitable development, and the increased access to social services by the poor and vulnerable in society?
Okay. Thank you very much. You know, there are several social protection programs that government thankfully has been running over the years. We can talk about the capitation grant. It's a social protection program because it's really paying for fees, and the vulnerable are getting access to education. But there we need to look at the issues of quality and then also relevance. If the kids are in school but there are no teachers, or teachers are there but they are not teaching, we need to address that also. And there's a study by the National Development Planning Commission which said somewhere that there has been some leakages in the capitation grants, which means that not all of it has been going to the schools as should be. Yes, government has increased the grant over the years, but it's just what the studies have shown that you need about 4 times what is currently available. It's currently about 10 cedis per child, and the request is probably they need to about 4 times that, about 40 cedis per child to be able to meet the bare minimum requirements for every child in school, basic school. Then we're talking about the livelihood and empowerment against poverty program. It's a great program. It's touched a lot of poor people, but currently it's only 1 out of the 4 of the poor are benefiting from that. The projection is to have about 350,000 households on the leap. Currently, we are not there yet. If everything goes on well, it could even reach as high as 1 million households, 1 million people. If we can, if we go up to 1 million people, currently about over 2 million people are in the extreme poor bracket. So if we get to 1 million people, we have not done much at all. But then that is where we are. Other countries are really doing much better than us. Then we also have the national health insurance. The issue has always been that and that's what captures the headlines. There are a lot of people are registered, but if you look at it very carefully, it's clear that the rich or people who have are benefiting more than those who are poor. Because one, those who are poor have to go and pay the premium, and then also they don't have that money to pay the premium. The rich can pay and still benefit. The rich have the access to the health facilities, the nurses, the doctors, they can get to those facilities, but the poor in the rural areas and the marginalized areas don't have that access. So we need to address the accessibility issue and ensure that, but coming back to education, you see, the issue of education being relevant is very, very important. If we say that we want our pupils to learn and become useful in society, then whatever they learn must also relate to the environment, the things that the economic activities in the environment. Nana talked about agric. How many of our kids after school want to say, because I've gone to school, I want to become a farmer? And so that person is not having the opportunity to engage economically, even though their parents have spent a lot of money. So some of their money has been invested, but they are not seeing the results. So in fact, they are even making them poorer. And so if that linkage to education, to agriculture, to industry, let me bring us back to this, just the one district, one factory, for instance. It's a very noble and good idea. What we need to back it up is the technical and vocational training and education, because that is where the neglect has been. People in artisanal learning, they have been neglected. There's no formal way of those in the doing carpentry, blacksmithery, or they are not benefiting from the education. Once they finish maybe GHS, they are on their own, except you go to senior high and then university. Why is it that those who have not gone to university or senior high should be neglected? That is where some of the inequalities remain, and we need to bridge that gap. Let us formalize them, encourage government to pay some funds to the vocational training, even artisanal masters. It should also be brought on board, formalize them to be able to provide training for the young ones who are coming up. And then finally, my point about the agric. Once we are investing in agric, we should know that we are trying to produce to feed ourselves. But the linkage with our trade policies is also challenging. We are importing a lot of things. If we are importing so much and we are still encouraging people to produce here, there's a contradiction. There must be some policy, deliberate policy to say we can import this much, but also we should produce this much and we should use it this much. If we continue to allow imports to drown our productivity, and that's why our industries are not producing enough. Well, they are not profitable because we are importing so much into this country, and the few industries that should produce are not able to compete because of the market challenges, the pricing. Well, let us try and help our local industries to produce, employ people, and then we consume what we also have. You can see today we are all wearing things that are produced in Ghana. And I believe that that is the signal we want to send. Let us buy made in Ghana things for the ordinary farmer, ordinary producer, processor, the woman who is producing shea butter to benefit, not the ones who is importing some of these imported brands. And that is where our country needs to go. And it will help us.
So how do we expand our market frontiers so that we, as a way of increasing financial inclusion for the poor?
Yeah. I think the point just made is very, very important, that what is a market? You see, we have to as the overused phrase goes, think outside the box. But it's important that when you are thinking of inequalities, you are moving away from the model of political economy that probably we know now and which is best known, because that is what people are used to. But you are thinking differently, and that is the idea. So what are we producing for whom? It's very, very important. What can we produce for ourselves that we should produce, but now we are importing? A market is a total economic activity. And so it's not simply that people want maybe pineapples. So you go to the Kwapim area and everybody's producing pineapples to European phyto standards, and at a time then it will collapse. But we have to think carefully in a sustained way to see what we can do, because every part of Ghana produces something very productive. It is only that because of the set pattern of trade, we allow, for example, most true cocoa farmers have never seen a chocolate in their lives. They have never. You are shocked because because you like chocolate and you think it was created in the Garden of Eden. You see, most cocoa farmers have never seen a chocolate bar in their lives. And so they are producing something that we have termed a cash crop, that for the last more than 100 and so years has become the mainstay of our economy in that way. But when you think about it, there's a lot that we are producing for ourselves. There's a lot that we should put the emphasis on, because that is what will sustain our people elsewhere. So you have cocoa somewhere. Fair enough. So there's a marketing board, the whole marketing board for it. We've made noise about grains and stuff. When I tried to go into a bit of farming, I realized that I couldn't even find people to work on the farm. Why? Because the young people there, they don't want something that they have to wait until harvesting time for them to get something. So we have to find ways of ensuring that they have some kind of regular incomes and that they have satisfying lives within what they are doing. This is the way to think through the whole issue of production and distribution within our economy. What should we produce and for whom? How will it help us? Otherwise, we'll always be led into this export-import paradigm that says this is what is needed elsewhere today. So we put a lot of resources into it, and then when that doesn't work out, people are made even poorer. That is the danger we have unless we have this comprehensive system. My thinking is that, and I can't say this enough, let's put poverty there as an issue. Today we don't, during the budget, I didn't even hear the word poverty. Maybe I wasn't listening completely. But it did not jump out that this is the purpose of this budget, that we are doing this so that the poorest in society will be lifted. If we were to do that, then it will lead us into thinking where to make savings, where to make investment, and how to distribute the little that we have. Who should pay more taxes? You know, we have to tackle that. Because some people have so much and they are hiding their money. How do we get hold of that money? In this our country, as in many other African countries, you can almost not get rich without government money somehow being involved. And we know that. It's been established. But we all sit down and then we think that some people are so rich because they are far smarter than the rest of us. Fair enough. Let them pay their fair share of taxes.
Right. Okay. Here with my friends from UNICEF, OXFAM, and the NMC boss himself is in house, and we are looking at bridging the inequality gap. As I mentioned earlier, you can also give us your take, because we've been doing the talking all this while, and we are doing the talking for you and on your behalf. So give us a call on 0501 552 729. 0501 552 729. If you're calling outside Ghana, then you can add the code +233. If by any means you cannot reach us on the phone or call us, then you can also send me a text. The number is displayed on your screen, 02444 75422. 02444 75422. You can send a text or a WhatsApp, but if you want to call us, then please call the line 0501 552 729, because if we are not able to bridge the inequality gap, then people become poorer and poorer, and our young people tend to do all manner of things just because they want to meet societal standards. You know, Nana talked before the break. He was touching on the market frontiers, expanding it, and also making deliberate attempts so that we can bridge that gap. And he made mention of taxes of the richest in society. then it brings me to how governments can also get them accountable, the richest of the rich, accountable for their stake in our shared global economy. How can that be done?
Thank you very much. I guess that is one of the biggest challenges that we face as a country. Our tax to GDP ratio is the lowest in West Africa. Our potential to collect more taxes is greater than what we are collecting currently. There are a lot of issues with our tax policies. From where we sit, we categorize taxes into two. One which is progressive. That means that the richer pay more, a fair share of the income and wealth that they have, and the poor to pay according to what they have. Our tax policies, if you look at it from the direct taxes perspective, earnings on income, which includes corporate income tax as well, are issues that we really have to look at. If you take, for example, I mentioned earlier on, our tax to GDP ratio is the lowest in the sub-region. It's based on some of the programs that we have in this country. We are given wide-ranging tax exemptions to all manner of corporate institutions. Some calculations have put it that in the recent past, I think between 2016 and now, we have made tax exemptions to corporates of over $1 billion. And this is money that these are corporate institutions which are making money, which are making profit and should be paying. These are not poor industries or companies which are struggling to survive, but we've made wide-ranging tax exemptions to set kinds of institutions, which has a lot of implications in terms of how much tax we are able to collect in this country. Like Nana said earlier on, a lot more of the rich people are not paying a fair share of their taxes. Recently, we've heard the senior minister talk about taxing properties. And I think that is one area that we have not been able to do well as a country. The people have these big mansions that they have built and they are not paying property taxes. And that presents a huge area that the government can raise a lot more resources to finance development in this country. Related to that is that some part of our tax policies and programs are not really progressive, especially the indirect taxes. Indirect taxes that are paid on goods and services, largely consumption tax. Whether you are rich or poor, is 17.5% VAT. Okay, which in effect is affecting the poor more. Some levies on some of our produce, like the petroleum, the levies on the pumps that we pay is fixed. Whether you are rich or poor, you all pay the same levy. These are some of the things that we're looking at. And if you look at it, some people have made a recommendation like the IMF to the government for institutions that are in the petroleum sector to pay at least 50% taxation on the income that they make to the state. This will bring in a lot more money for the government to be able to spend in the social sectors of our economy. So until we fix our tax system, we recognize that government is making effort at dealing with that, but we still have a long way to go. We need to work to bring our tax threshold to meet the regional standard that we have in ECOWAS, and then work towards making sure that the tax potential that we have a lot of potential to collect more. And I said, even if we were to just focus on property taxation alone, just properties alone, a lot of billions of Ghana cedis will come to government. And that coming to government means that government must also put in place progressive spending policies, prioritizing where the money should go to. And we think that such money should go to support social spending, areas that can trigger a lot more development and bring about parity in terms of dealing with inequality. Because evidence exists that countries that have been able to fight inequality, 69% of them actually spent more on public social sectors. So there is evidence to show that if we spend more in the social sector, in education, health, water and sanitation, agri, social protection, we will definitely be making a headway. Until we move these flagship programs from being pilots for over a decade to more consolidated and comprehensive programs that are backed by sustainable financing. And we can only achieve sustainable financing by increasing the tax revenue that we collect. I must tell you that Ghana is no more attractive to donors. And aid has been declining. The recent figures show that it has declined from 4.5% from 2010 to somewhere around 3-point-something%. We can no more get cheap aid. That is why government is issuing bonds everywhere, which are expensive to deal with. So aid is no more common, but aid still has a role to play in this country. The donor agencies, including, of course, UNICEF. Need to work more with government and direct government attention towards making sure that spending are going to the right sectors. Work with government to make sure that we streamline our tax revenue administration system so that we can rake in more money from the wealthiest people and tax less and less of the poorer people so that they can also climb up the ladder.
Let me, I see I'll plead with you to call our phone line instead on 0501 552 729. 0501 552 729. I see that you keep calling my test line so that I can read a few test messages that has come in here. So you can call our phone line. It will be displayed soon on the television set alongside the topic so that you can give a meaningful contribution if you want to. This one says, the suggestions being made by your panelists in the studio are very good and very critical, because these days, even if you remember the last interview with the international channel, it is as a result of these things, and it has to be taken a critical look at. Then this one is coming from Thomas from Tabora. Thomas, thank you very much for that one. And I have others here. Okay. This one says, okay, we are talking inequality, but we have not heard anything about corruption, and it is something that is really affecting us. If those in government will continue to embezzle funds, then of course the poor will also find his or her own way out, because we gave them the power and they are not using it to our benefit. Unfortunately, you didn't add your name. The issue about corruption. Okay.
The elephant in the room.
Hello, Rebecca. It is a good topic you're discussing today. Enough of the politics almost every now and then. You tune into every channel and it's about politics, and we are tired of them not doing anything about what we say or what the programs even talk about in the political arena. This is a very good subject. Kudos GBC 24. And this one is from Nami. Nami is reaching us from Dansoman. Thank you very much, Nami. Okay. We have more tests in here. Okay. So let me take this one quickly, then and I'll come to you on the corruption bit, because it has been raised here. This one also says that it is high time our social policies also find a way around in getting the voices of the poor into the policies, because sometimes the elite drafts the policies thinking it will inure to the benefit of the poor, but without hearing their voices. Okay, thank you so much. Nana, yeah, I have more text messages. I'll read them as we go on, but let's take your thoughts. Then I'll come to Mr. Dzradosi quickly on the corruption aspect.
You know, obviously corruption, Anwar just said, is the big elephant in the room. It is obviously a major issue, because monies meant for development in the general sense, when it has been stolen, cannot do what it's meant to do. But that is just a general statement. What happens with corruption and inequality is the following. When money has been allocated for projects, and even where it was correctly targeted, because there's nobody from the recipient community, so to speak, involved in the oversight. So they have no way of saying that this money was to serve us in this way and it's not being used. By the time we all hear about it at the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament, the corruption would have taken place already. So that is one effect of corruption. And one thing that produces is that there's not enough involvement of poor people in the management of the resources that are meant to help bridge the gap. Secondly, corruption breeds cynicism. It gets to a point where people say, whatever happens, they are stealing the money anyway, so why should I even do my bit? Because look, we can never reduce poverty and thereby bridge the gap without mobilizing poor people themselves. It has never happened anywhere that a benevolent elite would say, let us go and reduce poverty, and it happens. No. Poor people must be mobilized. There must be political mobilization of poor people themselves. They must become the architects of their own lives to the extent that that will then begin to have an impact on reducing the gap. But when there's so much corruption and people throw up their hands in the air, virtually that whatever happens, these people, we know they are chopping the money, and that has been the story for most of our independence years. So clearly, three things. One, the stealing means the money is not used for what it should be used for. And astronomical figures have been given for the amount of money that is stolen from the public sector in Africa. So huge that even if they didn't steal for just 1 year, the impact would be enormous. That shows you that there's a direct link between the production of the inequality and the stealing of public resources. But two, that these public resources are being stolen because not many people who should benefit are part of its management. I mean, look at the boards of directors of the various companies that have been given waivers or, corporate tax exemptions and all the rest. Go and check who sits on those boards, and you see the connection why they've got exemptions. Because part of why they put those influential people there is to ensure that their influence will pull them out of paying their fair share. And nobody who stands really to benefit from that corporate tax is on the board. It doesn't happen.
All right. Mawuli Selassie Sachu Kwashi says, my dear, please, my brothers in the studio are right. We don't have the expertise in Ghana to tap even what is made in Ghana and bring in and sell what is made in Ghana. We don't even patronize our own. After all, we are even tired about these talk shops. How can we expect the youth to think great and become what they need to become if the needed provisions are not made for them and there is no welfare system for them in Ghana to survive? And this is coming from Mawuli Selassie Sachu Kwashi from Newtown. Selassie, thank you. We'll go for another quick break, and when we come back, Mr. Dzradosi and Mr. Mohammed-Anwar, I'll also find out from you. Nana has given a fair share of what governments can do, so that you also have your bite on that. Please be with us. We'll be back shortly. Indeed, it is the Reporters Roundtable, a program by a journalist, for journalists. And today we are doing the talking on behalf of the people, because we work for the people, and it's not in every circumstance that we will need the journalist in the studio to tell on certain issues that are meant for technocrats. So today we have the experts themselves in the area of inequality, so that we can bridge the gap. Mr. Dzradosi, we talked about corruption, something, a canker eating deep into our fabric that is widening the gap almost every now and then. But how or what roles should governments, institutions, and businesses play in fostering inclusive growth?
Okay, thank you very much. So the basic understanding we have gotten here today is that poverty and inequality is rife in Ghana, and if we do business as usual, things are not going to get better, but will get rather worse. We have bemoaned a lot of the issues in the policy making, participation of individuals, and also prioritization of investment. Now, when the issue of corruption comes in, then it sometimes appears as if we tag the politicians and then those who are in authority at some level. But we all know that corruption is a two-way thing. Those who give are involved, those who also receive are involved. So whoever is benefiting and whoever is giving in the case of corruption, it requires that there should be a deliberate effort to make sure that every citizen is part of the decision-making process. Every citizen should know how much is going into a particular project or program. We should know how much government is spending for the basic school, for primary SHS. We should know how much is going to SHS. We should know how much is being spent on health, so that when programs and projects are being quoted, and let me just say, in Ghana some time ago it was estimated that the cost of one clinic or health facility was about 5 times that in the regional average. Why? Which means that some due diligence is not being done to ensure that the cost of items are really those that are needed to be bought and all that. So, and the future is being mortgaged. If the children of today are going to benefit from tomorrow, then we need to address some of these issues now. We cannot wait any longer. Things cannot be left to go unchallenged and unattended to. Children need to go to school for today, for their future. Mothers who go to clinics must have their services for maternal health. The poor, those who need to be given equipped to engage in economic activity, we should focus and target on them. We have all been talking about this targeting. It is not for fun. Yeah. If we don't target those people who really need, and those who have also target them in terms of resource mobilization, then that gap is going to increase, and in the future there's going to be a lot of insecurity, there's going to be a lot of fear, and if you're not careful, things that have happened in other countries, I won't mention them, we don't want them to happen in this country. But that is where I think we are driving at. Over the weekend, Professor Karim made that point, that we appear to have allowed things to go normal, but things are not getting normal, and we need to address it now. We cannot wait any longer. We must deal with the issues as if our very life depend upon it today and not for tomorrow. This is our clarion call for this discussion.
Mr. Anwar, your final one on how governments can raise the bar on growth so that we can commit to a future where all citizens have access to the economy, so that they can benefit and fully participate if they have the right tools.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a tall order, but I'll try to do that. I think essentially we need to refocus our national vision in terms of putting the human face to our national economy. So we will call for a human economy. And by human economy, we need to put at the center of all our policies, our vision, the Ghanaian. And this Ghanaian, we are looking at that Ghanaian who is the poorest of the poor. If we put our policy agenda on them, then all other things might fall into place. To the extent that if we clearly identify that inequality is an issue, poverty was an issue from the 1980s, in the 90s, and to the early 2000s. And that's where we're having poverty reduction strategies being developed everywhere in developing countries. Ghana has moved on. We are now a lower middle income country. Our language in terms of our national development discourse, should move from the poverty-focused strategies to dealing with inequality. Until we feature inequality prominently in our national discourse, in our policies and programs, we aren't going to be able to address the issues of inequality. And this cuts across all the sectors in education. We need to look at how do we promote an education system that makes sure that that poor child who is born in the Upper West region that Nana made reference to can have an equal opportunity in accessing free quality education. Because education, as we said earlier on, is a lever that can make people go. We should be investing in health services that addresses the inequities in the health sector, so that the rural woman who is pregnant does not lose her life just because she cannot access to health care. So I will end here by saying that, yes, let's refocus our national agenda on the human aspect of it. Let's scale up our social protection programs that Charles made reference to, and back them with sustainable financing by ensuring that we have a more progressive taxation system that brings in a lot of money to the state.
Nana, have we come to a time where we need we need to mobilize the poor so that we can focus on an agenda?
Yes, I think as this is essentially the reporters program, let me use my final thoughts to say the media must focus on this issue. It will never come to the fore if the media do not unpack this whole area of thinking. So, for example, when the budget is read and you go and ask somebody from MPP, what do you think of the budget? Of course, we know it's good. And you ask the NDC, what is do about this budget? Depending on who is opposition and who is government, we know. But we have to do more. If inequality is our focus, it will help us to know which questions to ask, where to ask them, how to ask them, and when to ask them. The media must monitor projects that are meant to bridge the gap by reducing poverty. So that poverty reduction doesn't become just an omnibus term, but really the poor are not just a statistic, but human beings. And from day 1 to day 2, how have we affected their lives? Having said that, I'm sometimes proud that we are one of the few African countries to have some programs, the capitation, the LEAP, and all of them. Free SHA is a splendid idea. But the quality issues will have to be looked at. And then we must monitor it to see in 5 years' time what it would have produced. If we do these things and do them systematically and back them in a sustainable way, we would see that the next set of figures from UNICEF or from OXFAM may indicate that the gap is being bridged.
Thank you very much, Dada. But before I close the chapter on this one says, my name is Zoiku Felix Kwame, Solid Age Africa Foundation. I'm loving the program and thank you so much for such discussion on bridging the inequality gap. I think corruption, nepotism, and others have become major factors which is creating more inequality gap among the population. And I think if we are determined to eliminate the inequality gap among the society, then we need to fight corruption intensively in all sectors. And that is coming from Zoiku Felix Kwame. Felix, thank you so much. And this one says we need a community center in every community where every information about the community can be found, so that we know how many people are living there, in order to get them the needed tools for growth. And still from Selassie. Selassie, thank you. And I have been in here with Mr. Mohammed-Anwar Sadat Adam. Mr. Mohammed, thank you so much for passing through. He is the head of programs and campaigns at OXFAM Ghana. Thank you once again. Nana Kwasi Gyan Apenteng, the man with the village that cannot be mentioned on air, is the chairman of the National Media Commission. He has other titles I wouldn't want to mention here. I would want to reserve this one. Nana, thank you so much for coming. I'm so grateful. And Mr. Charles Dzradosi. Mr. Charles Dzradosi is a Social Policy Analyst of UNICEF Ghana. Mr. Dzradosi, I'm so grateful. And we have been looking at bridging the inequality gap, a rethink of Ghana's growth strategy. Please be with us. We'll be back. Sure. Thank you to the production team, Celestina V, and my able production assistants, Alfred Kisiedu, Juliet David, Rukiatu, and my director, Lord, and all the production crew, the behind the scenes. What you're seeing, we have the cameraman, the sound, lighting, everything, and those who did the set. I'm so grateful. God willing, I'll see you again if God gives us life. We are out.